Welcome to the Hospital Finance Podcast, your go-to source for information and insights that can help you stay ahead of the challenges impacting healthcare finance. And now, the host of the Hospital Finance Podcast, Michael Passanante.
Hi, this is Mike Passanante, and welcome back to the award-winning Hospital Finance Podcast. Late last week, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act was passed and signed by President Trump. To give us a breakdown of what is in that bill, I'm joined by Mike Merola from Winning Strategies, Washington. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate the chance to be here with you. It's been a wild week in Washington, and anxious to share some of the details of the package with your audience.
Indeed, we're looking forward to hearing what's contained in there. So why don't we start out? And obviously, there's things that affect hospitals, and then there's other broader provisions in there. So for purposes of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to look specifically at the effect of the legislation on hospitals and other aspects of healthcare that are related to that. So in that vein, why don't you give us a brief overview of what's in the legislation?
Sure. I think from the hospital's perspective, the most critical piece of the package is this $100 billion. It's a $100 billion fund that's going to run through HHS that'll cover non-reimbursable expenses, all attributable to COVID-19. I think that's really what the industry is anxious to learn more about.
And so what can hospitals reasonably expect to see from this latest bill?
Sure. So in terms of the expenses that qualify for funding, and again, we're going to see the House literally, we're talking on Friday afternoon, the House just passed it, the President will sign it probably over the weekend or the next day or so, and we'll see as the agencies put out more guidance on the process. But from talking to folks on the Hill, from reading the legislation, examples of the types of things that hospitals will be able to spend this money on include, building or retrofitting new ICUs, increased staffing or training, personal protective equipment, building of temporary structures, and those types of things. And any of these expenses that the hospital can both bill the government and bill insurance, and then if they get reimbursement from the insurance company, they'll have to give the money back to the feds. But there's going to be apparently it's just a very flexible program with time for them to sort through all of that.
Got it. And how is Medicare reimbursement addressed in the bill?
Sure. Well, I think what I've heard the most excitement about is the suspension of the sequester, which will mean that hospitals have more resources generally, but also it's going to allow or increase access to telehealth services as well for seniors and other Medicare beneficiaries. And I think that'll be, I think it's going to be important for all hospitals, but particularly for those in rural areas to take advantage of.
And Mike, there's some other provisions in the bill to help hospitals with cash flow issues, maybe payroll issues during this critical time. Can you explain those for us?
Yeah, for sure. I think policymakers on the Hill and in the administration understand that COVID-19 has created significant cash flow concerns for many hospitals. So there are some provisions in there to help hospitals receive accelerated payments, specifically acute care hospitals, critical access hospitals, children's hospitals, and prospective payment system exempt cancer hospitals can request accelerated Medicare payments for inpatient hospital services. And this is an expanded set of hospitals compared with the existing accelerated payment program. So rather than having to wait until claims have been processed to issue payment, Medicare is going to work with qualified hospitals to estimate their upcoming payments and give that money to the hospital in advance. So qualified facilities can request a lump sum or a periodic payment reflecting up to 6 months of Medicare services. The accelerated payments will be repaid to Medicare, however. The qualifying hospital wouldn't be required to start paying CMS back for about 4 months after receiving the first payment, and they'd have at least 12 months to complete repayment without paying interest.
And Mike, there's another provision in there that talks about the SBA Paycheck Protection Program. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. So this is a $350 billion pot of money that's going to go to the Small Business Administration. That's really geared towards providing grants to employers, including hospitals, that keep their employees on their payroll, and they can be forgiven for a portion of the grant that's tied to expenses directly related to sustaining their operations during the pandemic. So that's payroll, mortgages, those types of things. They would qualify for forgiveness. So that's something I think there's a lot of interest and excitement about, even beyond the hospital sector.
Certainly a lot of information in the Act. We're going to have a summary up on Besler.com along with the blog post and the podcast associated with this topic that you're listening to. So if you'd like to dive deeper and get more information about what we've just talked about here today, you can go up to Besler.com and do that. Mike Merola, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today and shedding some additional light on this new legislation.
Thanks, Michael. Talk to you soon.
COVID-19, better known as coronavirus, has spread throughout the world. Symptoms of this respiratory disease may include fever, cough, and shortness of breath. These symptoms may show up 2 to 14 days after exposure. If you are experiencing these symptoms and have come into contact or are in an area with an ongoing outbreak, please call a hotline and/or consult with a physician. Clean and disinfect high-touch surfaces. For more information, please visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. Thank you.
This concludes today's episode of the Hospital Finance Podcast. For show notes and additional resources to help you protect and enhance revenue at your hospital, visit Besler.com/podcasts. The Hospital Finance Podcast is a production of Besler. Smart about revenue, tenacious about results.